The year is 1958, and the people of China are starving. Their lands have been taken away. There's war and destruction on every end. Men are taken away from homes to labor, but their families never receive payment. Who is responsible for this tragedy? Mao Tse Tung. A very famous name in politics is that of Mao Zedong. Tung. A little intro for this guy. He was a Chinese communist leader responsible for the creation of the People's Republic of China. As you will see, he was responsible for some very disastrous policies of the Great Leap Forward and the Culture Revolution. Mao was born on 26 December 1893 into a very poor and peasant family of Shoshan, which is located in central China. His early life was spent struggling, and after training as a teacher, he traveled to Beijing, where he worked in the university library. Yeah, nothing good comes out of reading. But it was during this time that he began to read Marxist literature. He loved it, obviously, and he was heavily influenced by Karl Marx. If you don't know who that is, you haven't been on Tumblr for a few good years. Karl Marx was a philosopher responsible for almost every communist regime in the 20th century, including the Red Army of Stalin. So his views were very influential. Let us know in the comments if you would like us to do a video on Karl Marx next. Back to Mao. In 1921, he became the founding member of the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, and set up a branch in his hometown. But real success came to him in 1923 when a nationalist party known as KMT allied with CCP to defeat warlords who controlled basically everything in China, including the people. Well, they mainly controlled the land, the wealth, and the industry. And a funny thing about humans is that they need food to survive. So if they controlled the food, they controlled everyone. But never think of your enemy's enemy as your friend. In 1927, the KMT leader, Chiang Kai-shek, launched an anti-communist purge. And it wasn't just a remove them from power kind of purge. It was literally a gather them around, disarm them, and open fire kind of purge. Yes, brutal. This caused Mao and the other communists to retreat into South China, where the KMT influence was slightly less, but not for long. As the KMT surrounded them in 1934, they had fully intended to make the CCP lay under 6 feet of solid ground. We know you're thinking that's a bit too much, KMT, but to be fair, the CCP would have done the same to them. Back to 1934. After the KMT surrounded them, Mao led his followers on the Long March. This was basically a 6,000-mile journey to northwest China to establish a new base. We're tired just thinking about it. But don't choose sides just yet. The Communists and the KMT were again allied during the 8 years of war with Japan. It seemed like nothing but common enemies would join these two parties, and this view was absolutely correct. These two started fighting once again after the end of World War II. This civil war was huge and drawn out, but ended in a very interesting manner. The nationalists appealed to the Big Four, as in America, UK, Soviet Union, and France, to mediate a settlement with the ever-growing communists in China. Mao Zedong immediately said that he would accept peace only on the basis of 8 principles, which could be summarized as follows. Nationalists shall have all the power seized from them. Quote, unquote. War criminals will be punished. The nationalists could see that Mao Zedong basically meant that he wanted to see them all dead and, moreover, humiliated. So they were a little hesitant to accept his demands. But the price for not accepting would be much, much more. This is how the events played out. The Communist Army continued their advance, and a major city fell on January 15, 1949. Chiang announced its resignation, and the nationalist power went to General Li. Li was a smart man. He knew that without peace, they would all be tasting soil 6 feet under soon enough. So he accepted Mao's 8 conditions. However, soon enough, these 8 conditions had transformed into 24 items, which were rejected by the government. Now the communists were angry and launched a full offensive against the nationalists. Mao Zedong oversaw the falling of many cities, each of which consolidated his power. It was becoming clear that the end was approaching for the nationalists as Mao made his capital at Peking and declared the establishment of the People's Republic of China. Within days, Soviet Union recognized this establishment. With this event, loyalties shifted and the dwindling nationalist army was crushed. Generals declared that they supported the communists and were ready to fight by their side as one of them. In fact, by the end of 1949, all of China was under communist control and by extension under Mao Tse Tung. Chiang Kai-shek fled to the island of Taiwan as Mao had openly declared that he wanted to see him fried. What to do after such a huge victory? Mao and the other communist leaders set out to reshape and revolutionize, as to say, the Chinese society. Industry came under state ownership, and China's farms began to be organized into collectives, which means the government collecting their lands. We all know how it ended for Stalin, and if you don't, you can check out our video linked below. And what happened to all those who dared organize opposition? Well, obviously, they were suppressed, but they were suppressed ruthlessly. Of course, this collecting of the land was of no benefit to the farmers, and the Chinese initially received significant help from the Soviet Union, but not for long. Very soon, relations cooled down. So this was not working. Mao thought and attempted to introduce a more Chinese form of communism, which would work even less. In 1958, Mao launched the Great Leap Forward. This aimed at mass mobilization of labor to supposedly increase agriculture and industrial production. The result was, well, the opposite. There was a massive decline in agricultural output, which, together with the poor harvest, led to a country-wide famine that saw the deaths of millions. People were not pleased. Although this policy was abandoned, Mao's position was weakened considerably. Of course, this was unacceptable to a guy like him, so in an attempt to reestablish his authority, Mao launched another disastrous policy known as the Cultural Revolution in 1966. This aimed at curing and purging China of the impure elements and revive the revolutionary spirit. 1.5 million people died, and culture was actually lost. People had had enough of Mao and his policies, so many cities came close to anarchy. In 1967, Mao sent out the army to restore order. At first, Mao seemed kind of victorious. Order really was restored, and many people were siding with him once more. He stopped making policies like the Cultural Revolution. Actually, in the late 60s, the international community was urging China to have better relations with the U.S., as their relations with the Soviet Union were pretty much dead. Mao came to see the Soviet Union as a bigger threat than the USA. He therefore hoped to use them as an alliance against the Soviet Union. This policy led to the historic visit of President Nixon in 1972. This meeting was Mao Zedong's last great public success, as his health deteriorated quickly. At the age of nearly 80, Mao Zedong died of a heart attack, still holding the most powerful position in all of China, the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party.